As we've been walking through this book of Ruth, you could very well just sort of get a warm feeling about this wonderful story, and you can just sort of assume that people are just kind of doing what they should be doing. But the context is set by the writer when he says that these things are happening during the days of the judges. And what the writer's really trying to tell you is that this wonderful story of God's loving kindness in these two people, Boaz and Ruth, is not common. It's very uncommon. It's at a time where people are sort of doing whatever they want to do in their own eyes, so that these two people are supposed to stand out in your thinking as extraordinary for their time. And also, and you need to know this as we move to this last chapter. This is for context's sake. We have also this tendency in our culture to make heroes and heroines of the people that we admire. We tend to see in them traits that we want to emulate, and we miss the fact that they are responding in a way that God has moved and chosen them to respond in. And it's not them, but it's the God behind them. What makes Boaz such a valiant man in a corrupt culture? You know, we would like to say, and we hear it all the time, maybe it was how he was raised. He was raised right. And everybody else was raised wrong. What makes Ruth so loyal to her mother-in-law? Why would she be a special kind of person who would be true to her mother-in-law and leave her own people and her own nation and her own gods? By the way, she wasn't worshiping God back in Moab. She's probably worshiping Chemosh, same God who has Israel burn their children. What makes her do it? Our thinking is that she's just special, right? When in this context, what I think the writer is trying to say is there's something more to that. Something more to the fact that these two people are going to stand out in this way and demonstrate the loving kindness of God. So I want you to keep those things in mind as we come to this last chapter in the book of Ruth. And what we're trying to find out is how is the writer going to bring this story to an end? How is the writer going to, what does he want to communicate as he brings the story to an end? Every story has a conclusion. And the meat of any story is usually found in how it concludes. That makes sense? That's when the writer says, this is what all of that was about. I told you a great story, and this is what its meaning was. And so when we get to this last chapter, I want you to see what this writer's meaning was. And y'all probably already know, it's not a love story, right? It's not one that makes you say, what a wonderful story. How great those two people were. How lovely their story is. It's so much deeper than that. We're at Ruth chapter 4. Ruth chapter 4, and I want you to see how the story sort of unfolds in this fourth chapter. It really falls into four distinct movements in the passage. It's the first one is Boaz is going to sort of set the scene for this legal matter. He sets the scene in verse 1, 2, and 3. And then they're going to be gathered at the city gate, which functions as sort of the place where legal matters happen, and you're going to see this sort of courtroom drama unfold, and that's going to happen in verse 4 through 8. And then after the legal matter is settled, Boaz is going to make a speech about why he has taken this matter to court. He's going to make a speech, and then the men who are gathered in the court are going to give an assessment of what they think of the legal outcome. That was a lot, wasn't it? That was a mouthful. So in that third section, you're going to hear a speech from Boaz on why he took this matter to court, and then those in the courtroom are going to give an assessment of what they think about the decision that's been had in the courtroom. Everybody with me? We're still on the same page, right? And then the last one is the author's going to summarize. The author's going to summarize. The author's going to put it in the context for us. He's going to lift it. He's going to lift the reader out of the story and then say, okay, now look back at it. This is what it's about. Everybody with me? 4 movements. So that when you know I'm at the 4th one, you know I'm about ready to finish. So let's look at it. And you know we've got to read it carefully. Whatever the writer is trying to say, he's going to say it. That just makes sense, right? Whatever he's trying to tell me, he's going to tell me. And we've just got to look close enough to see what he's saying and what he's trying to tell us. Look at verse number 1. This is the setting for the courtroom. Now Boaz went up to the gate and he sat down there. But by the way, most legal matters in ancient times in Israel happened at the city gate, right? For us in our modern times, it happens usually in the city square in the center, right? But not so for them. It happened usually at the gate, right? And so Boaz, the passage says, he goes up to the gate. Now, some of y'all are going to miss this, but I want y'all to see this. At the end of chapter 3, Boaz tells Ruth that he says, you know, you going back to your mother-in-law, and I'm going to handle this matter of redemption for you. And what you may have missed in the story is then Ruth then goes up to Bethlehem. She goes down to the city gate. This passage here says he goes up to the gate. So what the writer is trying to tell the reader is he's still down at the field. He goes right from his encounter with Ruth to the city gate. He doesn't even go home. He goes right to handling the matter. Does that make sense to you? So the field where all of this happened is down. The city is elevated like most of them were. It's on a hill. And so when it says he went up to the gate, he wasn't at home when he went to the gate. He was still in the field, and he left his encounter with Ruth and went right to the gate. He didn't waste time to have to deal with the redemption of Ruth. Everybody with me? And so here's what it says. And behold, the Redeemer, or the Goel, of whom Boaz spoke, was passing by. So some of your translations may say the closest relative, right? Here's what the writer is trying to say, and a Hebrew reader will read it right away. It says he left the field, he went right to the gate, right, and he sat down there, and just so happens the Redeemer is passing by. Y'all can almost read into it, right? It sounds like coincidence, right? But out of all of the people in Bethlehem, the Redeemer just happens to be passing by. That's what the passage says. Y'all can almost see the hand of God in all of this, right? So the Redeemer, by the way, some of y'all weren't here, so I want to make sure we're all on the same page. Boaz had told Ruth at chapter 3, he says, I'll redeem you. He said, but you know, there is one closer than me. There is a Redeemer closer than me, and legally in Israel, he has the first right to redeem you. And he says, but I'll handle this at my first chance. So this is that closer Redeemer that he was talking about. He happens to be passing by. So Boaz said to him, turn aside, friend. Now, y'all look down at your Bibles. This is a great teaching moment. This is why it's always good to have your own. Right? Look down at your Bibles. My Bible has a little note beside the word friend. Does anybody else's have a little note? Mine has the number 2 right beside friend. Anybody else's have a little note back there? Watch this. If you're going to study Scripture, if you're going to be a good student of it, you got to take note of those things, because that's the translator's way of saying that's a word you need to pay attention to. My Bible translates it friend, right? And most translations will say friend, but they'll also make a note, because that's a Hebrew word that's very difficult to translate, right? They settled on the word friend, but it's a really difficult word to translate. It really is a word intended to say to call your notice to him, but to purposely not say his name. So in other words, he calls him friend so he doesn't have to call him kin. In other words, the writer says Boaz intentionally does not call his name, but he wants all of y'all to notice that's him. One of the Jewish Talmuds, you're going to love this, Coach. One of the Jewish Talmuds translates it so-and-so, Mr. So-and-so. I love that. Right? The Net Bible translates it Mr. John Doe. Are y'all with me? So here's what the writer's doing to y'all. Y'all need to stay with it. The writer's trying to tell you he's purposely keeping this guy's name out of the record. Y'all stay with me. That's going to be important. That's going to be good. So Boaz says, hey, Mr. So-and-so, come sit down at the gate. And so the passage says he sits down. He turned aside and he sat down. Verse number 2. He then took, this is Boaz, took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, sit down here. So they sat down. He has to get a quorum. If it's going to have a legal matter, you got to have witnesses. So the Redeemer, the Goel, is passing by, but Boaz goes and finds 10 others who will witness. He's calling the court in the session. Y'all see it? And what matter is he handling? What legal matter is he handling? He's handling the redemption of Ruth. Now, so the courtroom is set. You have to know this. Watch this. He's going to start to talk about land. Up until this point, we have not talked about land in the book of Ruth at all. It's always been about redeeming Ruth. But watch this. He's going to start with a land matter. Right? But y'all got to know this because the writer has been building to this. This is not really about the land. It's about the woman. It's really about the woman, Naomi, who is going to find a redeemer through the marriage of Boaz and Ruth. That's what it's about. But you've got to deal with the land matter because the land matter is a part of the legal issue. Everybody with me? But let me tell y'all, it's not really about the land. Watch what happens. We're at the courtroom setting. Verse number 4. Let's back up to 3. Then he said to the Redeemer, or the closest relative, Naomi, who has come back from the land of Moab, has to sell the piece of land which belongs to our brother Elimelech, because she can't hold the land. Right? When a husband dies, right, the land either passed to his son, and if there is no son, then it would pass to his closest uncle. It had to pass to some near relative, right? Because at the time, women couldn't own the land. It had to be held by the patriarch. Are y'all with me? And so she has to get rid of the land. Verse number 4. So I thought to inform you, he said, saying, buy it before those who are sitting here and before the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if not, tell me that I may know. For there is no one but you to redeem it. Listen very carefully to what happens. I missed this many, many times before. He said, if you're going to buy it, let me know, so I will know. And then it says, and he said, it's the end of verse 4, I will redeem it. You'll see that? The closer redeemer said after the speech, okay, I'll redeem the land. Now, if you're reading this, you're thinking, the plan is going awry. That's not who we expected Ruth to be redeemed by. But he hadn't brought up Ruth. This is about the land. And right now, the Redeemer, the closer Redeemer says, I will redeem the land. Now watch what happens. Verse number 5, then Boaz said, on the day that you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also acquire Ruth the Moabitess. Notice he reminds the Redeemer she's a Moabitess. The widow of the deceased, in order to raise up the name of the deceased on his inheritance. So some of y'all missed it. I was struggling to read because I'm getting old. I had to bring my Bible closer to me. Did y'all notice that? I had to bring it closer to me. To raise up a name of the deceased on his inheritance. Now, I love Boaz because he was so wise about it, right? He says, okay, there's a field, right, that being the closer redeemer, you have the first right to redeem, right? Because that's a part of the legal matter. He says, now, if you're going to redeem it, let me know. And then the guy says, oh, I will redeem it. And he says, and oh, by the way, on the day that you redeem it, according to our law of redemption, you also must acquire Ruth, the Moabitess, as your wife. And here's what it says. In order to, this is right from the law, to raise up a name for the deceased. To make sure that the deceased name is remembered. To make sure his name continues to go on in Israel. Because one of the last things you wanted to ever happen, the worst curse you could bring on an Israelite is for his name to not be remembered, to be removed from the history. That's why they write all the genealogies down and they continue to keep it, because they want the name to be remembered in Israel. And he says, and so if you're going to buy the field, you got to get Ruth, and you've got to produce an heir so that the deceased name continues to go on. And then look at verse number 6. Then the close relative said, I cannot redeem. Y'all see it? He had a change of mind. So here's what y'all, let me just sort of help y'all to see this before we get there. The writer is setting up a contrast between Boaz and this Mr. So-and-so, this John Doe, who really should act as a redeemer, right? It would really be an act of loving kindness to act as a redeemer. It's his duty. And before, when it was the field, he said, yeah, I'll do it. But when he said, and also a part of your responsibility is to marry Ruth and to bring forth an heir to keep the deceased name going, he said, I can't redeem it. Why wouldn't he redeem it? Why couldn't he? So some of y'all got ideas already about why he would back out, right? Yeah, don't trust your ideas, just keep reading. Because it's going to tell us why. He says, I cannot redeem it. This is verse number 6. For I cannot redeem it for myself, because I would jeopardize my own inheritance. Now, the writer doesn't go into a whole lot of detail about why marrying Ruth would jeopardize his own inheritance, but hear very clearly what he's saying. If I marry Ruth, he says, then I've also got the responsibility of taking care of Ruth and Naomi. And he says, and if I bring all of that responsibility into my own, I may not be able to keep my own property, and I might lose it, and my name will be cut off. Because if I lose my inheritance, just like the deceased, my name might get cut off. And he probably also remembers, this is one of those details that comes back, that when Ruth was married to Mahlon, right? They had been married for 10 years and no child. Right? So he's probably thinking, she's a Moabitess and she's probably barren. I don't think I want to do that. So watch what happens. He says, I don't want to jeopardize my own inheritance. And you'll watch, the author is building a great point, because he don't want to lose his own name. He don't want his own name to be cut out. And so he says, redeem it for yourself. You may have my right of redemption, for I cannot, he says, redeem it. He says cannot, but he really means will not, doesn't he? He really means will not. And then the writer has to give the reader a note about Israeli custom. It's good for us too, but what it says is by the time that the writer has written this custom that he has to explain to the readers has probably already passed out of usage, right? Here's the note. Now this was the custom in the former times in Israel concerning the redemption and the exchange of land to confirm any matter. A man removed his sandal and gave it to another, and this was the manner of attestation in Israel. It says, listen, when you went to do business and you exchanged land, right, if you gave over your responsibility to the land, you also had to give your sandal to the man you gave the land to. Y'all follow me? So if ever he comes back and he say, I didn't sell that land to you, he says, no, because I got your sandals. So then the writer then finishes with verse number 8. Now after the reader understands why he's going to give his sandal to Boaz, and it says, so the closest relative or the redeemer said to Boaz, buy it for yourself, and he removed his sandal. He made it legal, made it binding. I have officially given you my right of redemption. I have given that up. Legally, it's not mine anymore, it's yours. And now the reader is thinking, that's what we've always wanted to happen. We wanted Boaz to marry Ruth. But the writer is not simply showing us how Boaz gets to marry Ruth. He's giving us a contrast between Boaz and Mr. So-and-so that's going to become even more clear a little bit later. So we're through two sections. Y'all with me? We've seen the setting and we've seen the court matter. The legal matter has just ended. When he handed him the sandal, right, that was the end of the court case. Legal matter settled. And so this is what Boaz says, beginning at verse number 9. Here's Boaz's speech. Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, you are witnesses today that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belongs to Elimelech and all that belongs to Chilion and Mahlon. Chilion and Mahlon are Elimelech's sons, who also both died in Moab. Verse number 10 says, moreover, I have acquired Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon, to be my wife in order to, he says, this is why I did it, in order to raise up the name of the deceased on his inheritance. You know, see that? I bought the land so that the land will always belong to Mahlon. Are y'all with me? To raise up a name of the deceased so that the name of the deceased will not be cut off from his brothers or from the court of his birthplace. You are witnesses today. Now, I've always told y'all this, right? Watch this. Let's think about this a moment. I've always told y'all this. The narrator's voice is always right. But what a character in the story says is not always right. But you can interpret or judge whether that person's words can be trusted by the way that the writer presents them in his story. The writer has presented Boaz as a man who could probably be trusted. Am I right? It has presented him as a valiant man, an honorable man, a man displaying the loving kindness of God, doing what is not necessarily his responsibility, but doing it out of a loyalty to his God. And so when he says the reason he's doing it is to raise up a name, what do you think about why he's doing it? He's not doing it because, he likes the look of that Moabite woman. Are y'all with me? He's not necessarily thinking about, my wife is getting a little bit old and Ruth is younger than mine. That's not what he's thinking about, is it? He has in mind a kindness to, watch this, Naomi. And so he is going to do his duty, which could probably jeopardize his own inheritance, just like it did for Mr. So-and-so. But he is going to do it not out of a romantic love for Ruth, but as a responsibility to the deceased. Are y'all with me? That part is important. He says, and all of you are witnesses today that I have done this. And beginning in verse number 11, the elders are going to give their assessment of the results of the trial. Verse number 11 says, all the people who were in the court and the elders said, we are witnesses. And then it says, may Yahweh bless the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, both of whom built the house of Israel. Y'all see it? So what do they think of it? What do they think of the legal matter, how it transpired? Yeah, Ken says they're giving their thumbs up. They're saying, yeah, we like what has happened. And he says, and by the way, and may the Lord bless the woman who is coming into your house to be like Rachel and Leah. This is so extraordinary. They're praying to Yahweh that a Moabitess would be like Rachel and Leah, who are, by the way, the wives of Jacob, whose name gets changed to Israel. So the whole house of Israel is built on Rachel and Leah. And he says, and may she be to you like that, a Moabitess. So here's what I'm trying to say to you. They recognize something extraordinary is happening here. Yeah, in the days of the judges, at some point they say, this is some unusual stuff here. They probably also recognize that Boaz is doing something that most of the rest of them would not do. He is demonstrating a hesed, a loving kindness of God that we just have not seen in the days of the judges. And he said, bless you, brother, because I'm not sure I'd do it. Watch this. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, both of whom built the house of Israel, and may you achieve wealth or valiance in Ephrathah and become famous in Bethlehem. Now, where it says become famous, my Bible has a note. Does y'all's have a note? By the way, if your Bible doesn't have those kind of notes, you need to upgrade. You need to upgrade. Right? And because they have the translators have as their job to help non-ancient Hebrew readers of the text understand it. But in doing so, they get in the way. Because the writer actually said, and may his name be called in Bethlehem. May his name be called in Bethlehem, which is a way of saying may he be famous, so that everybody will know his name, right? Help him to be a household name. But they translated become famous, right? But y'all probably see it already. There's something the writer is doing with the use of the name. Can y'all see it? It's starting to build. By the way, can y'all see it building? The closer Redeemer. Mr. So-and-so, no name, right? But Boaz is doing something incredibly loyal and faithful, and they're saying, and may after doing that, may Yahweh bless you with a name in Bethlehem. May your name be called. May your name be remembered. And here it goes. Verse number 12. Moreover, may your house be like the house of Perez. Anybody know who Perez is? Why would the writer call Perez his name there? Anybody know who Perez is? I would bet somebody, Coach, knows who Perez is. You know who Perez is, right, Coach? Perez, watch this, because I really believe the writer has this name in mind throughout the whole story. Perez is the son or one of the twins born to Tamar and Judah. Judah is a son of Israel. He is actually a child of Jacob, right? He is one of the 12 tribes of Israel. That's Judah. Well, Judah has some sons, and one of his sons marries Tamar. But his son dies before Tamar can conceive an heir. Sound familiar? And so then Perez then Tamar takes his brother like he should have. And then he dies, not leaving an heir. Two died. Right? Sound familiar? Kind of sounds like the story of Naomi, doesn't it? And I believe the writer probably has that story in mind. And so Judah says, I'm not sure I like this Tamar character. You know, she might be a black widow. You know, kind of strange that all my sons keep dying. And so he's got a third son, and he says, I'm not sure I want to give my third son to you. He said, let's just wait till he's older. But he doesn't seem to have any intention of giving his son to Tamar, right? And so Tamar figures it out, and unlike Ruth, Tamar dresses herself up like a prostitute, goes, sits by the road, and entices Judah, the father. And so Judah with Tamar, and they have a son, they have twins, and one of them is Perez. And so when the writer invokes Perez's name, he says, unlike the situation with Judah, who didn't want to do what the Redeemer responsibility should have been, he said, but Perez has become a clan leader despite all of that sin. And he says, so may he become like Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, through the offspring which the Lord will give you by this young woman. He says, listen, if Perez can become somebody, I know your descendant can become somebody. Listen, if Perez can become somebody and come out of all of that mess, then may the Lord really bless your child's name to come from acts of loving kindness. Then verse number 13 says, so Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went into her, and notice the writer, this is the writer, he's very careful with his words. He said, and the Lord enabled her to conceive. Y'all see that? It's not that he married her and they happened to have a child. It just happened to work this time. It says the Lord enabled her to conceive. It also suggests before he did not enable her to conceive. Watch this. Only two places in all of the book of Ruth where the writer actually talks about directly what the Lord has done. And that's one of them. So that what you see here is this seems to have been the plan of God out of all of that chaos to begin with. Yeah. Let me help you. We live in just such chaotic days, don't we? Where men are doing what's right in their own eyes. And sometimes we can get really discouraged, Miosha, and we can think, man, what is God doing in our day? You know, it always kills me, Gabe, because the church always gets afraid of the culture. And we start to despair and we say, man, it's just crazy out there. You mean the murder rate in the city of Houston is just going through the roof. It's crazy out there. And we start to fret and we say, what's wrong with people? And people are this and people are that. And the church is this and the church is that. And what we miss is, it's not like God doesn't know, and that's not like he's not still at work in this chaos. He's bringing about some things in this chaos that you and I don't know. Now, the writer tells us God enabled her to conceive, but does Ruth and Boaz know that? They're just trying to be faithful people. Let me say that again. In a culture where people are doing what's right in their own eyes, two of them are just trying to be loyal and faithful. They're just trying to display hesed. Watch this. And we're talking about the hesed of God. That's that loving kindness you extend to somebody else. To someone else. And they're displaying it. Because, by the way, all of this is not happening for them. It's happening for Naomi. Watch this. I'm beginning at verse number 13. At verse 13, the writer now is going to give his conclusion or his summary. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went in to her, and the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to, the writer says, a son. Boy, it would have been a wrench in the plans if it had been a girl, though, wouldn't it? Yeah, it still would have been in need of a redeemer, right? But it's a son. Then the women said to Naomi, now y'all watch this because this is important. The writer is summarizing, but he is using the words of the women in the city of Bethlehem to draw his own conclusion about what's happening. That part's important. It's on the lips of the women and the men that the writer is going to draw his own conclusions. Watch this. So the women said to Naomi, by the way, these are the same women who said when she came back, is that Naomi? They said, woo, child, did y'all see Naomi? Same women. The women said to Naomi, blessed is Yahweh who has not left you without a redeemer today. I love this. Because if you're not reading carefully, you're going to think the redeemer that the Lord has not left her with is Boaz, but it's not. Who is the redeemer the Lord hadn't left her without today? Come on, y'all look closer. Who is the redeemer now? Watch this. We have gone from Boaz being the Goel to Mr. So-and-so being the better Goel. And now he said, and the women say, blessed is the Lord who has not left you today without a redeemer. Who is the redeemer? Let me read a little bit further. Maybe it'll become clearer. By the way, I do think you're right, but I don't want to give it away to everybody else. But I heard you say it. They said, blessed is the Lord who has not left you without a redeemer today, and may his name become famous in Israel. May he also be to you a restorer of life and a sustainer of your old age. So who is that? Who is that redeemer now? Y'all see it yet? Y'all are thinking, man, you the preacher, just tell us. We came to you for the answers. The redeemer is the child now. The child is going to redeem Naomi. Watch what it says. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. Him, the child. Him, the redeemer. Your restorer for your old age. So here, watch this. I love this. This is what just happened. Here's what just happened. The women recognize in the way that most of us don't recognize, but Israel always does, is that they've always been looking for this redeeming seed since God promised that seed to Adam. And watch this. And they said, okay, now that you have this child and your name will not be blotted out, it will continue in Israel. He says, God then has given you a redeemer today, because somewhere in her line, a redeemer who is going to restore her life is going to be there. Shadow of which Jesus will be the substance. Are y'all with me? In the Old Testament, it is a shadow of what Jesus will be in the New Testament. And so listen, and watch this, I'm going to tell you, I believe the writer is going there because of how he's going to finish. And he says, may the Lord be blessed because he has not left you without a redeemer. You got a child who's going to keep you in the inheritance until that one who is going to restore your life in your old age is going to come. Verse number 16. Then Naomi took the child and laid him in her lap and became his nurse. The neighbor women gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Ruth. Did y'all see that? Go ahead, say no. Say you messed it up, preacher. That's not what it says. Y'all see what the passage says? A son has been born to who? Naomi. Y'all got to keep this in mind. all of those acts of hesed, of loving kindness, have not been about Ruth and Boaz. All of that is happening on behalf of Naomi. Let me say it different. God is moving people to act with his faithful loving kindness, not so that they can be blessed, but so that the one who went down to Moab with her husband and lost everything can be blessed. God is blessing Naomi through the faithfulness of Ruth and Boaz. See, I have to tell y'all this because in our culture, we like to think if I'm going to be faithful, then God's going to bless me. If I'm going to be faithful, then I expect God to give something for me. But what the writer is trying to say is, no, you just be faithful, and God will use your faithfulness to bless whomever he wants. It's not all about me. It wasn't about Boaz. He did something that wasn't going to be helpful to him, and it wasn't about Ruth, although she was going to benefit because she got some security. But she already told y'all in chapter 3, she wasn't doing it for herself. She was looking for some security for her mother-in-law. They kept somebody else in mind. They displayed that godlike character that we just don't have in our selfish culture, that they didn't have in their selfish culture. They considered someone else as more important than themselves. And I'm sorry, that's just godlike. That's just Christian. You know, they didn't consider, well, what about me? What you going to do for me, Lord? They did it for Naomi. And so the women recognized those acts of hesed, and they said, a son has been born to Naomi. So they named him Obed, or servant. And it says, the writer says, and he is the father of Jesse, the father of David. Y'all know who he is, right? And just so that you'll make sure that y'all catch this, watch this. He says, now these are the generations of Perez. He goes back to Perez, and he says, and these are the generations of that clan later Perez, given where he came from and how he was conceived. And it says, and to Perez was born Hezron, and to Hezron was born Ram, and to Ram was born Aminadab, and to Aminadab was born Nahshon, and to Nahshon was born Salmon, and to Salmon was born, there he is, Boaz, and to Boaz, Obed, and to Obed was born Jesse, and to Jesse, David. Now, for every Hebrew reader, they're going to think, all of that loving kindness led to the greatest name in Israel. He said, absolutely, the Lord blessed Boaz and Naomi and Ruth with a name that will always be remembered in Israel. Now, the one guy who would not display that hesed, he's Mr. So-and-so now. We have no idea what his name is. He's Mr. John Doe. But the rest of them, we know their names. Right? The writer to the book of Matthew records it in chapter 1. And by the way, the Salmon who is there is also married to Rahab, the Gentile harlot. And then you got Boaz, who's married to the Moabite in there. Now, why do I bring that up? Because listen, if there was no indication that God was going to include Gentiles, none of us would have been included. But in his godlike way, he is foreshadowing that one day, some Gentiles from Houston are going to be in there. Or from League City, Kemah. They're going to also be included in the redemptive history. But don't miss this either. The writer finishes with this genealogy that leads to David, right? After talking about this loyal faithfulness of a kinsman redeemer. But for everyone reading it when it was written, there's no way they could have known there was going to come a greater name out of this line too. A redeemer who would show the highest hesed, the highest acts of faithful love on behalf of somebody else. And that redeemer would also come from David. He would come from Judah and Perez. He would come from Boaz. He would come from David. And his name would be, I don't even have to tell you because his name is just too famous, isn't it? His name would redeem all of us. His name would be one day the restorer of life to Naomi. And when they gave Naomi the son who would one day lead to David, who would one day lead to Jesus, that's the Redeemer that I think the women prophesied about. That's the one who would restore us all. So that in this wonderful story, what I hope you come away with is a better understanding of what your God is doing, what he is like. He's still working in this terrible age. He's still redeeming in this terrible age. He's still bringing about his redemptive plan. And one day there's going to be another list of names. You know, as modern people, we read these genealogies and we say, who are these people? I don't know. I don't have. But one day he gonna read a list of names and you're gonna be on bended knee hoping that your name get called. But there's gonna be a Redeemer who will have redeemed you and who will guarantee that your name will be read and that your inheritance will be secure, that your name will not be cut off from the land. One day they're gonna call George's name. One day his name is going to be in the record. Listen, because of Jesus, your name will be in the record. He will redeem us all. Amen. Amen. Bless God.